They say you never forget the first time your heart decides to beat for someone else. I didn't believe it until that rainy afternoon when I first saw him. It wasn't anything cinematic, no dramatic music, no slow motion. Just a crowded cafe, the smell of wet asphalt sneaking in every time the door opened, and me, hunched over my notebook, pretending to write. And then there was him. He had that kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. He walked in, shook the water from his jacket, and smiled at the barista like he had known her for years. And when he laughed, it wasn't even directed at me, just something funny the barista said. I remember looking up, and for the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about deadlines or responsibilities. I was just lighter. I used to think moments like that only happened in books. But life has a way of reminding you it can be just as cruel as it is kind. Because meeting him didn't just change the mood of that afternoon, it rerouted my entire life. We started talking that same day. Something simple. He noticed my notebook and asked if I was a writer. I laughed awkwardly, told him I was more of a dreamer than a writer. He said that was better, that dreamers always had more stories to tell. Looking back, maybe that's why I let him in so quickly. He didn't make me feel like I had to prove myself. He made me feel seen. The weeks that followed blurred into a kind of soft focus memory. Late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn, text messages that felt like secrets passed under the table in high school, and those long walks through the city when neither of us cared where we were going as long as it wasn't apart. It wasn't perfect. We weren't perfect. But in those moments, it felt enough. He had a way of making ordinary things extraordinary. A paper cup of coffee tasted richer when he handed it to me. Rain didn't feel like an inconvenience when I was walking under his umbrella. Even silence was different with him. Less empty, more like a pause between notes in a song we were both learning to play. I remember the first time he brushed my hair away from my face. We weren't even kissing. We were sitting on a park bench, watching the lights of passing cars blur into streaks on the wet pavement. He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, looked at me like I was both a mystery and an answer, and whispered, "You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do." At the time, it sounded beautiful, like a promise, the kind you'd carve into a tree, believing it would outlast you both. I didn't hear the shadows hidden in the words, the quiet warning, the seed of possession. All I heard was love, and love was enough for me. Back then, I thought we were invincible. That kind of foolish, unshakable belief only young love can give you. We built our own little world out of inside jokes, half-finished sentences, and the comfort of knowing that someone out there chose you every single day. But love, I would later learn, isn't always about the choosing. Sometimes it's about the leaving. Sometimes it's about the way words echo long after the person who said them is gone. And that first echo, that first promise, still lingers in me like rain tapping against glass. There was a night, maybe 3 weeks after we met, when he invited me to the rooftop of his apartment. It wasn't anything glamorous, just cracked concrete, a couple of folding chairs, and a view of the city that looked more honest than beautiful. He handed me a cheap bottle of wine, still cold from the fridge, and we drank straight from the bottle like we were the only two people who had ever discovered what it meant to be alive. He talked about his childhood, about the books that shaped him, about the scars he didn't show to anyone else. I listened, not just with my ears, but with my whole body. I wanted to memorize him, the rhythm of his words, the way his eyes softened when he spoke about the past, the casual way he said my name like it had always belonged in his mouth. That night, he kissed me for the first time. Not rushed, not desperate. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a confession, a promise written without words. And from that moment on, I was gone. Completely, recklessly his. We became a habit in each other's lives. My mornings began with his voice on the phone, groggy but warm. My evenings ended with his hand on the small of my back, guiding me through crowded streets like he was the only compass I'd ever need. My friends teased me about being lost in love, but I didn't mind. Being lost with him didn't feel like losing. It felt like finding. Still, there were cracks, tiny ones, almost invisible at first. He could be quiet in ways that made me uneasy, pulling back into himself without explanation. I learned to fill those silences with laughter, with stories, with anything to keep the distance from growing. He once told me he hated the idea of being forgotten. I didn't understand why he said it, not then. I just promised I never would. The truth is, when you're in love, you don't always see the red flags for what they are. You see them as quirks, as wounds you'll heal, as challenges you'll overcome together. I thought his intensity meant he cared more. I thought his possessiveness was just another way of saying he couldn't bear to lose me. And every time he whispered that line, "You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do," I believed him. Not because I thought the world was small, but because in his arms, it was. The entire universe shrank down to the space between his heartbeat and mine. There were so many little moments that etched themselves into my memory. The way he'd rest his head in my lap after a long day, eyes closed, trusting me with his exhaustion. The way he'd walk me home, even when it meant doubling back miles for himself, just so I wouldn't feel alone in the dark. The way he laughed, loud, unrestrained, like happiness wasn't something rare, but something he could summon at will. Looking back, I realized I was collecting pieces of him without even knowing it. Every joke, every glance, every shared silence became a fragment I'd later have to carry. And I carried them willingly, believing we were building something permanent. But permanence is a myth we tell ourselves when we're too afraid to admit that everything ends. Back then, though, I wasn't afraid. I was in love. And love, for me, was enough. If I had known how much that sentence, his sentence, would haunt me, maybe I would have flinched. Maybe I would have asked him what he really meant. Maybe I would have seen the warning instead of the poetry. But I didn't. I smiled. I kissed him. I let those words brand themselves into my heart like a vow. And that's how our story began, with rain on the windows, wine on a rooftop, and a promise that would one day break me. Love has its own seasons. At first, it was all spring with him, fresh, tender, growing in ways that made the world feel alive again. But even spring turns into summer, and summer, no matter how golden, always fades into something else. Our golden days were filled with laughter. Road trips with the windows down, singing songs we half knew, our voices blending into something imperfect but ours. Sunday mornings spent tangled in sheets, sunlight slipping across our skin, the world outside suspended like it was waiting for us to reappear. But even in those moments, there were shadows I refused to name. It started small. The way he'd ask who I was texting, even when it was just my sister. The way his smile would falter if I laughed too long at someone else's joke. The silence that would stretch between us whenever I mentioned dreams that didn't include him. At first, I brushed it off. He just cares too much, I told myself. He's afraid to lose me. And wasn't that what we all wanted? To be loved so deeply that someone couldn't imagine a world without us? But there's a fine line between love and possession, and somewhere along the way, he began to blur it. I still remember one night in July. We were sitting on that same rooftop where he first kissed me. The air was heavy with heat, cicadas buzzing like static in the background. I told him about a job opportunity I'd been offered in another city, something I had worked for, something that meant the world to me. He didn't smile, didn't congratulate me. He just looked at me with eyes that felt sharper than usual and said, "If you leave, you'll never find anyone who loves you like I do." That sentence again, the one that used to feel like a promise, now felt like a chain. I tried to laugh it off, tried to tell him I wasn't leaving him, just chasing something for myself. But he didn't laugh. He didn't even argue. He just turned away, lit a cigarette, and stared into the night as if I had already betrayed him. That was the first time I realized love could feel like walking a tightrope. One wrong word, one step too far, and suddenly the balance shifts. The weeks that followed were filled with small storms. Fights over nothing, apologies whispered against my hair, promises we both knew we couldn't keep. He would hold me after each fight like he was afraid I'd vanish, his grip too tight, his breath uneven. And I let him, because I thought love meant staying, even when it hurt. We still had good days, of course. Days when we forgot the cracks, when his laughter reminded me of why I had fallen in the first place. Days when I believed we could still fix it, still return to that version of us who thought forever was possible. But love doesn't go backward. It only moves forward, and sometimes forward means falling apart. One evening, about a year into our relationship, we went to a friend's party. It was loud, crowded, full of people I barely knew. I remember talking to someone about books, losing myself in the conversation when I felt his hand clamp around mine, harder than usual. His jaw was tight, his smile forced. Later that night, when we were finally alone, he accused me of flirting. I cried, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I realized in that moment he didn't trust me. And if love doesn't hold trust, what is it really holding? Still, I stayed, because leaving him felt like tearing away a part of myself. Because I had memorized his touch, his voice, his stories, and I didn't know who I was without them. There was another night, late September, cool air drifting through the window. We had fought again, voices low but sharp. I had turned away from him in bed, my back to his chest. For the first time, he didn't reach for me. He just whispered into the dark, "No one will ever love you like I do." And this time, it didn't sound like a promise. It sounded like a warning. That was the beginning of the unraveling. The slow, quiet shift from us against the world to us against ourselves. The love was still there. I felt it in every kiss, every desperate embrace, but it was tangled now, twisted into something heavier, something harder to carry. I wish I could say I saw it clearly then, that I was strong enough to walk away before the damage deepened. But the truth is, I clung to him. I clung to the memory of who we were, to the sweetness of our beginnings, to the belief that love, our love, was worth every storm. And maybe that's what makes heartbreak so cruel. You never realize you're in the middle of the ending until it's already too late. It didn't happen in one moment. That's the thing people often misunderstand about breakups. They rarely crash down like a single thunderbolt. No, they unravel like a thread you didn't notice was loose until you're left holding nothing but tangles in your hands. With him, the unraveling was slow but merciless. The laughter came less often. The silences grew longer, and the sentence, the one that had once felt like a vow, started haunting our nights like an echo we couldn't silence. "You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do." By then, it no longer sounded like love. It sounded like a curse. The final night came in winter. A gray December evening, the kind where the sky feels too heavy to hold itself up. I had just come back from visiting my parents, my suitcase still in the hallway. He was already tense when I walked in, his eyes dark, his body pacing like he'd been waiting for a fight. "You didn't call me last night," he said. "I fell asleep early," I explained, tired from the trip. "That's not an excuse. You had time to post a picture with your friends." And just like that, the spark ignited. The argument grew sharp, words slashing deeper than either of us intended. He accused, I defended. He raised his voice, I cried. It was the same script we had repeated for months, but this time the lines felt final, like a play reaching its last act. At some point, I shouted through tears, "Why don't you trust me?" His face twisted, his hands shaking as he pressed them into his hair. And then he said it again, louder, harsher than ever before. "Because no one will ever love you like I do." The words rang through the room, through my body, through every fragile memory of what we had been. And in that instant, something inside me broke. Not the kind of break that shatters, but the kind that collapses quietly, like a building giving in after years of hidden cracks. I realized I was exhausted, not just from the fight, but from loving someone who turned every touch into a test, every laugh into a suspicion, every silence into a battlefield. And so I said the words I never thought I would. "I can't do this anymore." He froze. For a long moment, he didn't speak. His breathing was ragged, his eyes searching mine like he could find a different answer if he just looked hard enough. Then he laughed, short, bitter, wounded. "You'll come back. You always do." But I didn't. Not that night. Not the next. I left with nothing more than my suitcase and the echo of his voice chasing me down the stairwell. My heart was heavy, my hands trembling, but my feet kept moving. Because somewhere deep down I knew that if I turned back, I'd never be able to leave again. The days after were a blur. I moved through them like a ghost, my body performing tasks while my mind replayed every moment we'd ever shared. His laughter, his arms, the way he used to look at me like I was the only thing that mattered. How do you teach your heart to forget something it once believed was forever? Nights were the worst. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, half expecting him to call, half dreading that he wouldn't. Sometimes I picked up my phone, typed out a message, and then deleted it before pressing send. I missed him. God, I missed him. But missing someone doesn't mean you belong with them. I learned that slowly, painfully, as the weeks crawled on. One evening, maybe a month after we ended, I ran into one of our mutual friends at a cafe. He asked gently, "How are you holding up?" I smiled in that way people do when they're trying not to cry. "I'm fine," I lied. He nodded, but his eyes softened. "He still talks about you, you know." That night, I broke down, because part of me still wanted to believe that meant something. That love like ours couldn't just vanish, that maybe he was right. Maybe no one would ever love me the way he did. But love, I was learning, wasn't supposed to feel like a cage. The last time I saw him was accidental. Early spring, about 3 months after the breakup. I was walking downtown when I spotted him across the street. He was with someone, a girl I didn't recognize. Her hand looped through his. He looked happy, or at least, he looked lighter, like the weight we carried together was finally off his shoulders. He didn't see me, and maybe that was for the best. Still, as I stood there, invisible to him, the words echoed in my mind again. "You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do." For the first time, they didn't sound like a promise or a curse. They just sounded untrue. Because maybe he was right. Maybe no one would love me like he did. But maybe that was exactly what I needed. That winter night was the day our story ended. At least on the surface. But endings have a way of lingering, of leaving their fingerprints on every chapter that follows. And as much as I tried to close that door, his voice still followed me into the silence. A year sounds like a long time. People say time heals all wounds, as if days and months are stitches that will close you back together. But 1 year after him, I learned that time doesn't heal everything. It just teaches you how to carry the ache more quietly. The first months were survival. Waking up, brushing my teeth, pretending to care about the things that used to matter. I threw myself into work, into dinners with friends, into books I didn't finish, movies I didn't remember, anything to fill the silence. But grief has a way of finding you in the cracks, in the quiet ride home after a late shift, in the sudden stillness of a Sunday morning, in the smell of cigarettes drifting from a stranger on the street, the same brand he used to smoke. Even a song on the radio could feel like betrayal. Because it wasn't just music, it was our song, and it dragged me back to a rooftop kiss I would never have again. By the 3rd month, I thought I was doing better. I stopped crying every night. I even went on a date. He was kind, gentle, and he made me laugh. But halfway through dinner, I caught myself comparing the curve of his smile to someone else's. That night, I cried again, not because I missed him more, but because I realized how deep he had rooted himself into me. 6 months in, I started writing. Journals filled with memories, not because I wanted to remember, but because I was terrified of forgetting. Isn't that the cruelest part of love? The fear that if you let go too much, even the good moments will slip away? One entry still haunts me. I had written, "He told me no one would ever love me like he did. What if he was right?" By the time the year mark approached, the sharp pain had dulled, but the echo remained. I remember the exact day. December again, 1 year to the week since I left. Snow was falling, soft and soundless, just like it had that night. I walked through the city streets, bundled in a coat, the world glowing under the holiday lights. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't looking for him in the crowd anymore. That startled me. For months, every face in the distance had been a question. Could it be him? But now, the question was fading, and that terrified me almost as much as losing him had. Because if I stopped looking, did that mean I was finally moving on? Or did it mean I was forgetting? I don't know which one hurt more. 1 year later, he still lived inside me. Not in the same burning, desperate way, but like a ghost who refused to leave the house we built together. Sometimes I still heard his voice in my dreams. Sometimes I still woke up reaching for someone who wasn't there. And yes, sometimes I still replayed that sentence in my head. You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do. But now the words carried a different weight. Back then, they felt like a chain. Like a warning, like a curse carved into my skin. But after a year of carrying their echo, I began to see them for what they really were. His fear. He was afraid of being replaced, afraid of being forgotten, afraid that the love we shared wouldn't be enough to last. And maybe in some way, he was right. Because love doesn't always last, not the way we want it to. But that didn't mean it wasn't real. I still pass the cafe where we once spent rainy afternoons. I still see couples holding hands in the cold, and a part of me aches. Not because I want him back, but because I miss the version of myself that believed love could be simple. A year later, I've learned that healing isn't about erasing someone. It's about learning to carry their memory without letting it define you. And so, when people ask if I'm over him, I don't know how to answer. What does over even mean? He will always be a part of me, just as I will always be a part of him. Our story didn't vanish when we broke. It lingers quietly in the spaces between who I was and who I'm becoming. That December night, exactly 1 year after I left him, I stood at my window watching the snow fall. The city was quiet, wrapped in white. I thought of him, where he might be, who he might be with. And for the first time, I whispered into the silence, "I hope you're okay." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't closure. It was something softer, something fragile. A recognition that love, even when broken, still deserves to be remembered gently. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting, not replacing, but learning to let the memory exist without letting it control you. 1 year later, I still don't know if I'm over him. But I know this. I survived him. I survived the nights without his voice, the mornings without his touch, the weight of the words he left behind. And maybe survival, in its own quiet way, is a kind of love too. The kind you give to yourself when no one else can. 2 years have passed now. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Other times like I only just walked out of that apartment with my suitcase still trembling in my hand. Time plays tricks that way. It stretches and collapses, never quite letting you know how far you've really traveled from the person you used to be. People tell me I look lighter these days. They say my laugh is brighter, my eyes more steady. Maybe it's true. Maybe I've learned how to wear healing like a second skin, even if the scars are still visible in the right light. But late at night, when the city quiets and the walls close in, I still hear it. His voice, that sentence. You'll never find anyone who loves you like I do. At first, it haunted me like a warning. Then it hurt me like a truth. Now it lingers like a memory, still sharp, still heavy, but no longer defining me. Sometimes I wonder what he would think if he saw me now. Would he recognize the woman I've become? Would he regret the words he threw at me? Or would he stand by them, still certain that no love could compare to his? I don't know. And maybe I'll never know. Last spring, I almost wrote to him. His birthday was coming up, and I caught myself scrolling through old pictures. One photo stopped me cold. His smile, wide and unguarded, taken the summer we drove to the coast with nothing but a tent and too many dreams. For a moment, I forgot all the fights, all the nights of doubt, and only remembered the warmth of his hand in mine, the way he looked at me like the ocean was inside my eyes. I typed out a message. "Happy birthday, I hope you're well." I stared at it for an hour, then I erased it. Because sometimes reaching out isn't love, it's longing. And I've learned the difference matters. Life has a way of moving even when you're stuck in yesterday. Friends got married, babies were born, people moved cities and built lives that no longer included me. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I started to rebuild too. I traveled. I stood on cliffs overlooking seas he never touched. I danced in kitchens with people who didn't know my past. I kissed someone new beneath the glow of street lamps, my heart beating fast, though not as recklessly as it once did. And yet even as I tried to step into new stories, I carried the old one with me. He was my first real love, my first real loss, and no amount of moving forward could erase that imprint. Sometimes, I still dream of him. In those dreams, we're not broken, we're just us, the way we once were, two people who believed forever was a promise we could keep. I wake up with tears I can't explain, torn between gratitude and grief. 2 years later, I've realized something. Closure isn't an ending. It's a choice. A choice to stop searching for explanations, to stop rewriting the past in your head. But closure doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't even mean letting go entirely. It means learning to live with the unanswered questions. Would we have lasted if we had tried harder? Was love really not enough, or did we simply stop believing in it? Did he ever regret letting me walk away? I don't know. I probably never will. And strangely, I've learned to accept that. One evening not long ago, I passed by a street musician. He was playing our song, the one that once felt like ours alone. For a moment, I froze. The world seemed to tilt, memories flooding me so fiercely I thought I might collapse. But then, instead of crying, I smiled. Because for the first time, hearing that song didn't feel like losing him all over again. It felt like remembering a part of myself I hadn't visited in a while. And maybe that's what he'll always be. Not a wound, not even a regret, but a chapter. One I'll always turn back to, even as I keep moving forward. So here I am, 2 years later, standing in the middle of my own unfinished story. I've learned that love doesn't vanish just because it ends. It lingers, it transforms, it leaves shadows and light both. I don't know if I'll ever stop missing him in some small, secret way. I don't know if another love will ever feel the same. But maybe it doesn't have to, because maybe he was right. Maybe no one will ever love me like he did. But maybe, just maybe, that isn't a tragedy. Maybe it's a reminder that every love is different, every story unique, and one day, someone will love me in a way that doesn't have to look like his. Until then, I carry him. Not as an anchor, not as a chain, but as a memory, beautiful, broken, unforgettable. And so my story doesn't end here. It simply pauses, in this quiet, in this ache, in this hope that tomorrow still holds something tender, something waiting. A door left ajar, a chapter unfinished. Because sometimes the greatest love stories don't end. They linger, forever unfinished, in the spaces between what was and what might still be.